Hi, sweeties. How are you doing? Welcome to Cimnanya, and thank you all so much for all the love and support. Hope you are great. So I came across this video where this man was talking about the abuse of, black women during slavery, especially their bodies, right? And I have to compare and contrast. Like when I say compare and to contrast, back then and now, and I am kind of finding out that nothing really changed because if all this happened during slavery, it is still happening to this very moment. And they have told us that, slavery is all over. Get over it. It was 100 years ago and all that. You are opportune to be in the land of honey, milk, and sugar and all that, right? And you are supposed to make use of what you got here instead of trying to revisit history, right? Now, looking at this video, it dawned on me that what they did back then, like using black women's body for experiment when it comes to hospital, right? It's still happening to this very moment. How do people experiment with human body without even using the adequate care or the necessary things that they are supposed to use? They do it with people that look like me in order to make sure that their own women are okay. Man, what is really this? Because I am really trying to wrap my head around this, but this is really very hard. You know what? Let's get into this video.
Hey everybody, Professor Moore here. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is how the history of slavery is under attack in American schools. Every day we see new headlines drawing attention to efforts to whitewash and erase the true history of slavery. And the goal of these people is to distort the reality of slavery and leave us with the idea that slavery wasn't that bad. This is why it's important for historians and teachers to constantly draw attention to just how bad slavery really was. Because it's only when we acknowledge the torture and trauma of slavery that we can trace the legacies of that violence to our institutions and society today. Perhaps one of the darkest and most disturbing parts of the Atlantic slave trade is how enslavers treated the bodies of black women. During slavery, their bodies were not their own. They were pieces of property to be bought and abused. The abuse of black women's bodies during slavery began the moment that enslavers put their necks in chains and marched them in a coffle to the African coast to be loaded into the cargo hold of a slave ship. And that abuse only grew worse once they entered the dark bellies of these floating torture chambers. We have several historical sources testifying to the fact that enslaved black women were routinely assaulted by white men on slave ships. In 1577, the English explorer Francis Drake captured a black woman named Maria off the coast of Guatemala. In his diary, Drake called Maria a proper Negro wench, and during her time on his slave ship, she was assaulted by several white men and eventually impregnated. And that's where the historical record ends. We have no idea where she ended up or what her fate was. If these women and girls were not part of the nearly 2 million African souls that lost their lives on the Middle Passage and were buried beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, they could expect far worse once they reached the shores of the land of the free and the home of the brave. The abuse continued once these women and children stepped up onto the auction block. Many black females were funneled into what was called the fancy girl trade, where they were sold with the specific intent to become sexual slaves for their masters to abuse at their will. Other enslaved women were forced to become breeders to produce as many children as possible with complete strangers in order to produce more profit for their enslavers. Knowing what enslaved black women faced on plantations, it's a lot easier to understand the decision of Margaret Garner and other enslaved women who killed their female infants and children to save them from a lifetime of abuse and exploitation. Often these women were charged with a crime, but not murder. They were charged with destruction of property. In a society that turns human beings into commodities, sometimes death is preferable to life when that life is nothing but never-ending trauma and abuse. Even though these topics are extremely difficult to acknowledge and discuss, these are exactly the kind of stories that we have to keep alive to fight back against the powerful movement in this country that wants to whitewash and distort the reality of slavery. This is the part of our past that many people want to erase, and we can't let them. In the spirit of keeping the true history of slavery alive, I want to talk about 6 black women and how slavery robbed them of their lives and made sure that their bodies were not their own. However, this is not simply a story of monsters and victims. This is a story of resilience and resistance. This is a story of the power of the human spirit to survive even the darkest of nights. Sarah Baartman was born in South Africa in 1789, and in 1810 she allegedly signed a contract with an Englishman named William Dunlop that had her appear in freak shows across Europe. Although it is debatable how much control she had over this situation or if she even gave her consent. Baartman had a genetic characteristic that gave her enlarged body parts, and she was displayed in front of curious crowds and looked upon as a freak of nature. In Europe, she was called the Hottentot Venus, and she became a star attraction. On stage in London, she danced and sang while wearing skin-tight, flesh-colored clothing. Wealthy customers could even pay for private shows in their home, where their guests could touch and fondle her. Baartman was sold in 1815 to an animal showman who displayed her on stage with a collar around her neck. After Baartman died in 1815, the French scientist Georges Cuvier obtained her body to study her like some kind of exotic animal. Scientists like Cuvier had labeled Sarah's South African people as the lowest Africans and the closest to animals. And in his diary, Cuvier wrote, "I have never seen a human head more resembling a monkey than hers." Cuvier made a plaster cast of Baartman's body, and then he dissected her. After the dissection, he boiled off her skin, then reassembled her bones and added them to his collection. He then pickled her brain and private parts and put them in jars to be displayed in Paris's Museum of Man. Baartman's body parts remained on public display in that museum until 1974, and they were not rediscovered until 1985. After his election in 1994 as president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela requested the repatriation of Sarah Baartman's remains. The French government finally agreed in March 2002, and Sarah finally came home and was laid to rest. The McCoy twins share a similar story to Sarah of abuse and exploitation for white entertainment. In 1851, an enslaved couple in North Carolina gave birth to conjoined twins that they named Millie and Christine. When they were just 2 years old, their enslaver took them away from their parents and sold them for $1,000 to a man in the entertainment business. Over the next decade, the twins were displayed in freak shows across the US and Europe, sometimes drawing crowds as large as 150,000. On several occasions, the twins were sold and even stolen by medical professionals and showmen who wanted to profit off of their unique body. And during their lifetime, the twins were repeatedly examined by more than 30 physicians who violated their bodies in the name of science. When slavery was abolished in 1865, the twins went on to have a very successful singing career, gaining great fame in Britain. On October 8, 1912, Millie died from tuberculosis, and her sister Christine died 12 hours later. It's amazing to think about what these twins survived and how strong they had to be in a society that rarely saw them as human and rarely saw their beauty. The stories of black women have often been erased from the history of slavery and overshadowed by their enslavers like J. Marion Sims. Sims was a famous doctor from South Carolina who became known as the father of gynecology for his innovative techniques that saved the lives of women during childbirth. For decades, you could find statues honoring the achievements of Sims, like this one in South Carolina. But by far, the most impressive statue was the one that was in Central Park in New York. If you read the plaque of the statue, you'll learn that Sims was a surgeon, a philanthropist, a founder of a women's hospital, who made many brilliant surgical achievements that made him known throughout the world. But you know what the plaque doesn't mention? That the only way that Sims came up with these brilliant achievements was by experimenting on the bodies of enslaved black women. And we know their names: Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. Sims had these women get on an operating table on all fours, and he cut them to pieces with no anesthesia in order to come up with the medical innovations that would save the lives of mostly white women. Thankfully, after a brave and provocative protest by black women, the statue of Sims was removed from Central Park. After the removal, one black woman said, "Each day I walked past that statue and I saw him up there, I felt personally disrespected. It's a historical moment for me, and it's an emotional moment. I just feel the right thing is being done. I feel that my ancestors can finally rest." If you want to see a much better statue that honors the sacrifice that black women made to this country, then go to Montgomery, Alabama, and look at the Mothers of Gynecology Monument to Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. These stories and so many others can be found in the amazing book, A Black Women's History of the United States. It's books like these that keep the true history of slavery alive, and not only acknowledge the violence and abuse that black women faced, but celebrate their resistance and the power to carry on in the face of an inhumane system that may have robbed them of their bodies, but could never rob them of their souls.
Why is it always listen to black women until it becomes inconvenient? Imagine jumping to the belief that black women are on the internet lying about their experiences, despite the fact that they're experiencing threats and harm and vitriolic behavior in their comment sections because it goes against the reputation of your fave. This comment was left on a video where I was addressing the direct harm that leftist lady sent barreling towards the black community, particularly some of my mutuals, people who I've talked to, people who I've spent time with, people who I care about, people who I've watched deal with this vitriol, deal with this harm. And it's wild that you think we're lying about the things that we're actually experiencing, when in fact, your girl is lying. The fact remains, the Democratic Party never sent her an offer. The fact remains, it was a secondhand group. It, yes, has Democratic talking points, you know, equality and communal care, that sort of thing. But because she lied and then double and triple and quadruple down, it pointed direct harm to a bunch of my mutuals, to a bunch of people in my community. So it's wild, but this is a pattern. This is a pattern that we've seen before, where a white woman will get online and lie about some stuff, and it turns into direct harm for black bodies, for black humans, for black people. How many times do we have to see this pattern? How many times do folks like you have to come rushing in and caping in for the person who was actually lying? We have history to back this up. It happens a lot. And rather than taking accountability for that direct harm and removing that content, your fave doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down, thus continuing the harm that we already deal with. On top of all of the racism we get from folks that y'all allege are on the other side. Meanwhile, y'all leftists and the far right are looking a lot alike from our perspective. The anti-blackness, the hatred, the misogynoir. But perhaps instead of reducing our experiences, you sit this one out.
This is all I got from this one. And this video actually, I mean, I don't know, but it really took me back to so many things. While I was listening to it, a lot really popped on my mind. My head was just like, you know, a coin. Why? Because this actually boils down to medical racism. I don't know if you understand what I am saying. While he was analyzing that, and then I remember how still to this very moment, I mean, black men are still being used as experiments, especially when it comes to medical fields and all that. Like he talked about, I mean, like, you know, how they cut up women without, black women, let me not say women, black women without anesthesia and the rest of it. Now, there are some things you listen to and you do not want to imagine it because you know what it feels like, you know, to kind of feel caught or to like hurt yourself, hit your leg on a chair just in the house, or like, you know, knock yourself out somewhere. But man, but when you think about how they cut pieces someone's body, right, without anything to help subside the pains and all that, I just don't know how that sits, because this is really atrocity on the highest level, you know? So they have been experimenting. It did not start today. And the fact that the people that did so many things, like some malpractices there, I know I am trying to use some words, some people that did some malpractices when it comes to human beings, how is it that they end up always getting monument and all that set up for them, and then they end up being worshipped for doing that and all that? So this is to say that people that look like me have been sacrificing all their lives for every other person. Until this very moment, this is still what they still want Black women to keep sacrificing, because they feel like, you know, if you cannot do it, I mean, like, you already got to do it to save every other person. I mean, you just have to. I love the fact that Black women are like, you know, like everything, the gods of the world, the mother of the world, and all that. But there are some things that I am about to take back from them, because, I mean, watching and listening to this, I don't want us to be the mother. I don't want you also all to be the mother of the world, the mother of the nation. I mean, you can be the mother of your children and the mother of your immediates and all that. Not everybody, because literally you all put your lives, like, you know, on the line for everybody. Until this very moment, you all can see how far and how where it has landed Black women, most especially, you know. It's not like it has yield food, but majority of them feel like it is something that they are entitled to. Or, I mean, like, you know, we are always supposed to get this. How do you use someone that look like me as an experiment to in order to carry it on perfectly well for the other person? Why? Because you feel like people that look like me do not experience pains. People that look like me, like, you know, I mean, our life is different. I mean, we are all human beings. I mean, we all bleed the same blood. I don't know if you understand what I am saying. There is no special person this time here, because human beings are, a human being is a human being. I don't know if you get what I am saying. But we've been like, you know, oh my God, I am about to speak another language, you know. I don't know how they, like, you know, sat down on themselves and like decide that, I mean, this particular set of people does not deserve anything good. Sh0ck too. I mean, it's really very horrible, you know. And to talk about how he talked, I mean, talk about July. I mean, how they see Black women, their bodies, and all that. I mean, this is something that I probably also may have experienced from them, because some of them are kind of weirdos. I don't know how to say it for people to understand, but I am sure you really do understand how they act and behave, because they feel like people that look like me are like that fetishization and all that. You see them act all irresponsible when we probably see, like, you know what thing they say, when you are a Black woman, you are never alone, because there will be someone somewhere like watching, and you all already know why they are watching. They are not watching with good heart or good spirit. This is something that they have, I mean, like, that already they have done, and they still have it in their head and all that. That's why majority of the time when people say that they don't know history or they don't understand their history, these people really knew what their ancestors did, but they just do not want to accept it, because it looks like there is a genetic connection from the people in the past to this very moment that wired, that most of the thing they did, they still do it this way. They still do it. I don't know if you get what I am saying, So, I mean, the whole thing is just really, I am just trying not to wrap my head around this thing, because like how, And still, like, what really changed? Like, what really changed? Because in 2024, Black women are still not, I mean, like, people that look like me are still not being given, like, when they go to hospital, I talk about how they experience pains and all that, they still do not get anything. Rather, they give you Tylenol just to come, like, like, and then they come and they scream, I can't stand, I can't do this. They get what they are looking for. Why? Because they have already put us in a certain kind of, I don't know, like, in a box that, and that is where we belong. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is how I feel it, Man, I can't continue. See you all in my next video. Bye for now.